Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Stephanie Stevens Show. Today on my show, I'm going to be talking to a young immigrant, um, Eva Simone. Um, I'm going to let her tell her story, but today we are going to be talking about immigration, advocacy, and her challenges of coming to Canada. Um, Looking for a better opportunity and a better understanding, and just a place that she thinks um, has an opportunity for her to just be herself and a place to call home. And I asked her because, in this pandemic time, we're having such issues with um, so many of the marginalized programs. And so I asked her to come on my show so she could just explain it to us in a more understandable way of coming from a person who looked at Canada as a place to call home. So, how are you today, Eva?
I am well. Thank you, Stephanie, for having me. And any contribution that I can give is meaningful to me because we still have to acknowledge how folks, folks that do not subscribe to the conventions of male-female binaries,
Mm-hmm.
outside of that, are still marginalized even within communities. So thank you for this opportunity, and I hope that we can use this platform as a way of having that conversation.
Okay. So, like I said, is I want to thank everybody for tuning in to Pronoun TV, the Stephanie Stevens Show. Today, we're just going to educate and inspire others about certain things, about issues that concern us as the LGBT Two Spirit pronoun community. So the reason I asked Eva on is because I think that she can give us a clear understanding of where she is within this group and the fact that we need to keep having these conversations because our voices aren't being heard, because nobody ever addresses the fact of the government, immigration, racism within immigration, and the people that are making the decisions about marginalized people's lives that might not be sometimes on the up and up. Because for me, I think that marginalized people need some sort of an understanding, some sort of compassion and humanitarian um, way of life. This is something Canada says that it does, but we keep coming up with these certain issues time and time again that these marginalized people, in a sense, well, they call us marginalized, um, in a sense, being denied certain services, being denied certain rights. And this is the place that you come to. Canada is the place that you come to and you want to call it home. So, Eva, can I just first ask, how do you identify so our audience is clear that we understand where you are with your voice in this conversation?
The intersections that I focus on is Blackness, transgender, and woman. So
Okay.
those are the intersections that I identify as Black, transgender, woman.
Mm-hmm.
And did you want me to expound on that? Did you want me to talk more on that?
No, 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 not just yet. I just wanted to understand how you identify first. Now, let's go back. Where are you actually from?
I'm from the island of Jamaica. I
Okay.
came here from the island of Jamaica.
Now, I had a conversation with Chadwick Chung about, he's from the island of Jamaica as well. And we had a great conversation about gully queens,
Mm-hmm.
about the gully queens in Jamaica. Um, so, but Now, how long have you been in Canada? When did you come to Canada?
I've been in Canada for over a decade. I came here in 2008, and I came here identifying as a boy,
Mm-hmm.
man, because that came from a space. There's history and there's layers to why I identified as such, even though I've always known that I've not seen myself in maleness or boyness or manliness. I tried, but that that was not all the kind of socialization around being man boy did not
Mm-hmm.
resonate with me. So I came here from Jamaica, not having the language to say, "Hey, I, this is who I am."
Okay. Now, what were the I mean, when you came to Canada, did you come as a refugee or did you just come as an independent or you just came as a work visa student?
I came here as a refugee because the way that I navigated spaces in Jamaica,
Mm-hmm.
um, I always knew that on some levels, besides the kind of microaggressions around queerness, for people who do not subscribe to heteronormative male-female identities and gender binaries and sexual orientation, I was vulnerable to a certain kind of violence, and I was always aware of that
Mm-hmm.
at any time that violence could come to a head. So I knew that I didn't want to. Jamaica was not the place that I want to be,
Mm-hmm.
uh, because was not I was not enabled to live my authentic self.
Okay. Now, when you say you came as a refugee, did Canada welcome you with open arms, or was there a, a process that you had to go to be declared? I guess that's what I would say, or just be accepted as a refugee.
There's a process, and it's a long process. I don't know how much of that has changed since I've been here in 2008. But when when you come, the burden of proof is on you, and it makes sense that because on the level that you want to be sure that people are authentically coming here for the reasons that they say that they are, but within
Mhm.
that, I feel like there's a level of um, a level of um, the burden of proof piece can be tricky when sometimes you don't even have support from the people from the country that you're coming from. So
Mhm.
that's a layer, that's a big barrier for a lot of people to come here and and uh, make a refugee claim and not being able to support their claim because of the structures, the social structure from the countries that they're coming from.
Okay. Now, the reason I'm talking so much about immigration is because I'm finding that I see a lot of the underlying issues with immigration and the ministers who make the decisions about the people who they think are legitimate and non-legitimate. And like you said, sometimes people from marginalized countries or just marginalized in general don't have a clear voice because they don't understand how to explain to you what they're actually going through. Because sometimes when people are refugees, they're already traumatized.
Yes, and
And
in telling that story, there can be a re-traumatization that happens.
so now, and for me, when I first came to Canada, I came with a work visa and everything progressed from there. So I was okay in a sense of, but I still had to jump through a few hoops to get what I needed to get.
Yes.
And to this day, it's even after, being a permanent resident and all, you still are jumping through hoops to just sort of have a voice and sort of obtain what they call the Canadian dream, freedom of religion, of freedom of just expression, and just freedom to just be who you are. And the fact of that there are so many immigrants here, you would think it would be easier for us as people of color to have a real voice in this open country, or supposedly open country and welcoming country. Now, we know racism is alive and well in Canada. We always pretend because they welcomed us as immigrants, but sometimes we just have to say it the way it is. Now, the reason I say that to you is because I watched something the other night on television about the election. They wanted to trigger an election. But when they were showing all of the ministers and the MPs, for some reason, they were all white. Yeah. And mainly male, yeah, making the decisions about immigrants. Yeah. Now, I found that rather interesting, and nobody's saying anything. Now, I also find it rather hard that you, as a Black trans woman, me, just in general, anytime we want to focus or do anything in the country, the majority of the time when we have to go deal with bureaucracy, we're dealing with white people who, first of all, don't really even understand immigrants, don't even remember that they were an immigrant. Yeah. And making the decisions about people that they think, are you worthy to be here? Yeah. We're all worthy to be here, regardless of what the situation is with the person. We all have the right to have housing, a safe place to live, and just in general, jobs, education, things that matter in life. Now, you talk about advocacy. Now, coming from Jamaica and coming from the struggles and as a refugee, what are you doing to help other refugees?
So, my advocacy is more around gender inclusion. My focus is more around gender inclusion and gender diversity, not so much the immigration process. And because I came here, I saw a community that is innovative, and I stand on the back of that community. And we all advocate from different perspectives. While one of my intersections is immigration, it's not my focus because I don't have the know-how other than my personal experience around having migrated here and having gone through the process. There is a lot of legalese that goes along with immigration as it's concerned. The things that I can talk about and have a little bit more knowledge about is around Blackness, because I've been Black from day one up till now. And having come here and immersed myself in living my truth, I'm learning and unlearning some things about who I am in this world and what I represent and how I experience myself from a position of gender identity. So with regards to immigration, I might not be the best person to speak on it outside of my personal experience.
Okay. Now, I like the fact that you made that was very clear. And I love that because it made me understand exactly it answered the question exactly. And Thank you. And now, when you look at immigration in a sense, do you think immigration, I mean, just from your personal experience, let's say when you first met the first security guard or the first minister or the first judge, what was your first impression of you coming to Canada?
That I'm at the mercy of someone and that I don't have autonomy, and that because I don't have, because of the power structures and the power dynamic of that person who has to validate my story, even though for me it's a real experience.
Mhm.
It's a real experience that in those moments of even getting getting an appointment with an immigration is re-traumatizing, because the idea that here you are in a country that is offering you some level of safety. Now you have to convince this other person that you need to be protected. And that is daunting. That is, that in itself is a kind of pressure that no one should have to go through, for
Mhm.
the reason that your life is at stake.
Okay. Now, because the reason I'm asking these sort of questions is because I find that these questions are what's missing in a lot of the conversations, the in-depth truth about coming to Canada or immigrating to any country. And
Yes,
there's a person, regardless if it's a judge or a minister or immigration officer, whoever is making the decision about your life and the value of your life.
yes,
Because the value of your life comes down to that story that you told.
yes,
And for you to constantly be fighting with someone through years of like you said, a long process is very concerning in a
mm-hmm,
sense for you to tie this person's life up
yes,
for years because number one, you would think immigration, like you said, would be more compassionate
yes,
and understanding and welcoming, but yet they say we're understanding and welcoming, but yet there's a roadblock because the first thing they say is we don't believe you.
yes,
Because we've been to Jamaica, we've had parties in Jamaica, we danced in Jamaica. We don't see violence on TV from Jamaica and the trans community. We don't see violence on TV for this and that. We have friends that live in Jamaica and all these kind of things. Now, and they try to make a rash decision from that. Which I think, and I think sometimes you need people in that whenever anyone goes anywhere for anything, they need to have an understanding and they need to be able to deal with people that can relate to them, understand them, regardless
yeah.
of the situation they're coming from. Now, I wanted to talk to you about the Gully Queens in Jamaica. Did you ever see them there? Do you know any of the girls from there?
No, the first time I came across that, uh, that story, that video of what, it broke my heart. It broke
Mhm.
my heart because I didn't realize how entrenched um, the kind of transphobia is in Jamaica, even within from the position of LGBT community, the lateral violence, and just taking a look at that, I I had to acknowledge the place of privilege that I navigated Jamaica from, because I've never had a situation where I was living in a gully.
Mhm.
And that is quite telling of the kind of depravity that when people identify as trans are faced with. Bad enough, you might be ostracized from your community, from your family, but to be living literally with sore, that is depraved. And it broke my heart to see that. It broke my heart to see that even though they were forced to go underground, they didn't have a choice. It's their life or living underground. They were still facing oppression from the powers that be. And the pushback is that even underground, they would come and find them to oppress them. So that broke my heart. It broke my heart. Like, where do you go if you're a trans person? If even underground where the sewer is, you can't go. That is quite telling of a social construct.
You know, it's really sad. Even from where I come from, the United States, people think it's all hunky-dory there and everything is good. With no health care for the trans community, with no real jobs offering to them because whether the way they look or because they don't understand them, even though they're in the land of equal opportunity and abundance, people in other countries see America as oh, they have everything, this and that. And this is not necessarily true. A lot of the times, the trans community, and no matter where it's from, are very marginalized. They live below the poverty line, and they're doing a hustle every day, whether it's escorting or whether it's trying to do the drag shows or whatever they're trying to do to just make a living and fit in.
Yeah.
And this is why you see a lot of the hurt around the world, because other trans women can relate to trans women around the world because they understand what they have to do to have their voice heard, to really fit into society. And I think the government hasn't taken a real look because they see maybe sometimes trans women don't look the way that they think that they should look or act. And not every woman in the world is acting proper.
Yeah.
And this is the way, and then they use the umbrella as you're crazy or your mental illness or you're sick in some way. And sometimes these things aren't true. Sometimes people just need a helping hand without that conversation of who you are and what you are and where you are.
Yeah.
And this is something I find terribly shocking. Yeah. That we still are fighting the good fight for things. Sometimes our voices are on deaf ears. They're setting up these quick fix programs to try to fix things that are ongoing if they would just sit down and listen. Yeah. And really listen and really understand that sometimes that marginalized people can't speak for themselves and they have to make the proper decisions about people's lives because they're dealing with human beings. Yes. That are fragile. Yeah. And if you really listen to someone and you watch them and you can see that the story sometimes is really deeper than what the outer frame says. Yeah, yeah. And now, what do you think is needed? What's missing from our voices? People of color, the LGBT two-spirit pronoun community, what's missing?
What's missing from our collective voice or the external voices?
I think as a collective, because we've been shouting, we have the pride parades, we have all these different functions, we have all these different advocacy groups and people doing things. We keep saying the same thing over and over. So something in our voices aren't being heard.
I've seen, in the context of downtown Toronto, I've seen representation, but I would love to see more, because representation, not in a tokenistic way, is meaningful to pushing the conversation and the needle forward, right? When people, from a policy standpoint, if someone is going to make a policy around equity, diversity, and inclusivity regarding sexual orientation and gender identities, and there are no queer and trans folks at the table, who is informing that policy? How do you inform a policy that is going to affect people that are queer and trans without having their voices heard, without centering their voice? They have the lived experience. Why wouldn't that be a valuable tool around making policies that will affect people who are queer and trans? So those are the kinds of things, the kind of meaningful representation, making sure that we center the voices of the people who are most vulnerable at the onset of policies, so that it is well informed, it is rounded, and it will be meaningful once implemented. So that's the way I see some of that happening in Toronto, but I would love more. I would love more, because there's been an expansion from once upon a time it was LGBTQ, and then the T was added, and now we're learning that outside of the T, there are these multiple not emerging, they've always been, but emerging identifying of gender identities outside of the binary of cishet, transgender. There is now non-binary, and I say now loosely because they've always been there. It's just that now there's been an evolution of identities. And from that perspective, I feel like internally as a community, we have to be open to embrace expansion, so that in the conventional world outside of LGBTQ community, they could follow suit. If we're still questioning people who are identifying as non-binary or gender non-conforming, why wouldn't cishet heteronormative people question? And it is our inability to kind of sit down and say, okay, so life is not a static, it is always evolving. And with that evolution comes people understanding themselves from different perspective, and we should embrace that. I feel like the unwillingness to evolve from what the ideals that we have been conditioned to believe, that that's the end all and be all, is the main thing within community. That lateral violence piece is the drawback with regards to sexual orientation and gender identity.
Now, well said. You know, I like what you said at the beginning of it. We need visible representation. Visible. So when we're looking at people on a panel who are making the decisions about our lives, a lot of those people need to look like us.
Yes.
Or have had our experiences or lived our experiences, and understand that. Not somebody that's bureaucratic and just says, this is the law and this is the way it is. Because the law is interpreted the way we interpret it as human beings.
Yeah.
Now, what I also found lacking is, like you said, the representation of, yes, we have LGBT lawyers, doctors, and politicians, but you very rarely see them speak up for the LGBT two-spirit pronoun community on a continuous basis, which always should be able to keep our voice in the media or at the forefront of news. What's happening now? And you don't see this so much in a big city like Toronto with a huge LGBT community. Now, I find that that is a problem. And I also find that now that that our community, in a sense, was so big and had so much abundance and had such a big voice for quite a few years. And now it's not even about the pandemic. Before the pandemic, we still had a real decline in the LGBT community as far as housing, equality, jobs. The village itself has destroyed itself with the non-policing thing. What do you think about that?
Non-policing? Well, I'm 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 of the opinion that if policing was happening from an equitable and just place, we would not be complaining about policing. There are people within our community who are over policed. And I look at the time when we had gay men missing due to a serial killer who remains unnamed. And people were talking about their missing peers, their missing friends, their missing chosen family. And it goes unheard. But when it came to policing our bodies from an oppressive way, the police would show up to do that. So on one hand, the police has a function in our community, which is fundamentally to serve and protect us all from a place of equity and inclusivity, rather than projecting homophobic, transphobic sentiments onto us when dealing with us. On one hand, that is what is supposed to happen. On the other hand, that's not necessarily what happens, because people bring their own personal biases around LGBTQ people, and serve from that position with those biases. That is counterproductive. You can't be there to protect, but you're projecting biases on people. And instead of engaging them in meaningful way, instead of protecting them in meaningful ways, you alienate them. However, from the perspective of community, when we talk about things, if there's not a certain group of people who say something, it's not honored. So we have to find a way to from a policing perspective, to change the culture that it has, the organizational culture that it has had historically regarding LGBTQI bodies, but also delve deeper from the different intersections that LGBTQ people navigate life, because we're not a monolith. Some of us, when we navigate life, or gender identity is going to come up. Some of us, it's going to be our racial identity. Some of us, it is going to be your sexual orientation, and just understanding that it's not this monolithic thing, but it is a broader thing that we have to be able to address and identify accordingly. And that's the message I would have around policing. The culture of the organization has to change with regards to race, gender, sexual orientation, because there's still oppression being felt and not heard by the organization itself.
Okay. Now, you know, it's it in all fairness to the police, and as far as I'm, you know, my sort of a little bit of a take on it, I do think that the police should have been in the Pride Parade in uniform or whatever form, because when we are like they say we are marginalized people, we need visible representation so we can see when something is going down, we can see someone visible that we know that can protect us and help us. Now, like you said, a lot of the times police maybe and the organization needs to change because of the abuse or because of the mentality of what they presume the LGBT two-spirit pronoun community to be and how we sometimes act and are. But their job is to protect us and serve no matter what the situation is. Now, I like the fact that you said that it needs to change at the ground roots of the organization. And, you know, changing the old guard is very hard. It's exactly the same way within our community.
Yes.
If you don't change the old guards, you don't add new blood and new life, the community becomes stagnant and can't grow. And us, if we're not open to having that open dialect and conversation with others about changing these things and them being open to changing these things, we're not going to go anywhere.
I'm agreed. Beyond dialogue is important because we're getting an understanding from each other, and dialogue by its base says that it has to be a two-way street. You can't have dialogue if it's not a two-way street. So if I'm hearing your perspective and you're hearing my perspective, is to find a happy medium to say, how do we address this issue? And I feel like there is a lot of talking, but not a lot of listening, and not a lot of trying to understand beyond our own perception of things. And when people can't dialogue in meaningful ways, we'll always be butting heads because we're not opening our own opening to the idea that we may not have all the answers. Collectively, and individually, people come from, let me start from an individual perspective first. People are coming from an individual perspective to fit into a collective. And the thing is, when we find commonality from all those kinds of differing perspectives is where we should focus on, not the differences so much, but where we find the commonality and build on that commonality so that it works for everybody and not just some of us.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, just a couple of more questions because you've been fantastic. Where do we go now? What happens now? We're in the middle of a pandemic. Where do the refugees go now who might be, or in a sense of let's just say marginalized people. I'm not going to just say refugees. I'm going to say, where do marginalized people go now who are in turmoil with the government, whether they're looking for their status, whether they're looking for their some humanitarian help in some way, or whether they're just looking to get their lives back on track with either getting a job, housing, equality, just in general. Where do they go now? Because this pandemic will now throw off a lot of these governmental programs that probably were there to help a lot of people. What do you think needs to happen right now?
Well, um, from my personal experience with programs being changed and support systems being changed and being deferred and delayed as a result of COVID, it has heightened the kind of social determinants of health that LGBTQIA people have been experiencing all along, but not only has it heightened it, but it has made the most vulnerable populations from our community even more vulnerable. When we're in a digital age where everything is online like we are now, and someone doesn't have a stable home, someone doesn't have gainful employment, someone doesn't have a computer, internet, a cell phone, when everything is virtual, how do we still keep those people engaged? How do we still communicate what is happening from the pandemic? How are they informed about the pandemic, which they are more vulnerable to, not having the stability that I may have? How do we make sure that they're centered and that they're facilitated in a way that doesn't deny them the basic rights that they have? How do we make sure that we support their mental health? Those are the conversations I think is needed to be had, because it's not the people who can come home to an apartment, has a key to come home to an apartment that is more vulnerable. It's the people who don't. It's the people who have a medical appointment and can't communicate with their doctor because they don't have a cell phone. Someone who has used the support system in community where they would get a meal, but because of COVID, that support system is no longer there. Someone who, because of the situation around COVID, can't go to walk into a shelter without testing for COVID, don't have the facility, don't have nowhere to go to get tested before they come in, and are therefore further disenfranchised, further disconnected from community, disconnected from support, disconnected from information that is important to keep them safe and alive. What are we going to do? How are we going to make change what we've been doing conform to the new normal of coping with a pandemic and keeping people safe? How do we do that?
You know, you raise a lot of great questions, and I'm going to hashtag this on the immigration website and on the Canadian government's website so they can watch this show and understand that they're going to have to do a lot better by us. And we're going to have to do a lot better for ourselves, having a bigger voice and making sure that our voices are heard and that we keep up the good fight to make sure that you, them, us, we understand each other and we're being heard. Yeah. And instead of this year after year, month after month, prolonged, like you said earlier, sore that just constantly keeps festering and staying there and never healing, all because someone from either politically, government, or someone who makes the laws is sometimes just making quick decisions about people's lives and trying to just get them out of their office because they want them to just go away. Now, I really enjoyed talking to you, Eva. You made sense with a lot of things, and I think we covered a great ground of work here and things that we need to do. I would love to have you back again on a panel with a couple of the other trans women, because you brought up some things that I think that all of us could have a more open and viable conversation to where we can educate each other on the panel. Um, a group of us as a panel can have a voice to sort of inspire each other and help each other and inform each other and in ways that can help our community in a whole. And I just want to say thank you for coming on the show today. It was great meeting you. I'm glad I got to meet you and talk to you after all these years of seeing you walk around and look beautiful. I now know that Eva Simone is fabulous. And I just want to say thank you again for coming on to the show. Um, I just want to just say this in closing, just a few words of encouragement for our community that is really, I'm sure you see it. I don't have to tell you. Just can you give us a few words to the community and to maybe the community leaders? What should be happening?
So, firstly, I want to acknowledge that I stand on the back of people who came before me and have been doing the work long before I came here and are still doing the work. The Monica Foresters, the Yasmin Prashad, the Susan Gapka, the Stephanie Wolry, and I could go on and on, but I stand on the backs of so many trans folks who have been doing the work and been in the trenches doing the work and have curated space for people like me to safely transition. And I want to acknowledge that. I don't want the Danny Aria, the 519, the Julie Rose. Those are powerful women who have been doing the work and continue to do the work even in a pandemic. So I want to acknowledge them for what they have done and laid the groundwork so that someone like me can be where I'm at right now. The Ivana or Tegoza, I think. I hope I didn't botch her name. But I just that is our home. The people who came before us should never be left out of the conversations that we have around these things, because besides having the lived experience, they also have the actual know-how to move forward. They're seasoned in what they do. They laid the groundwork. So we need to honor that, but also utilize the kind of information and the education that they have around all of this so that it is well informed, so that the next trans person who transition can see the value in immersing themselves in community rather than transitioning on their own, knowing that we still have community, but be interested to invest in community because other people have invested in it so that we could be here. So that is the way forward, making sure that people are carrying the torch when the people who came before us can no longer carry it. I feel like that's the way forward.
Wonderful. So I just want to say this to my audience. I just want to say thank you to Eva Simone for being on the show today, explaining to us how it felt to be an immigrant coming from Jamaica and finding her place and calling Canada her home, and advocacy of helping others and understanding that doors must be open and we must have an open dialogue and conversations to make sure that what they say we are as marginalized people, that we obtain the rights as Canadian citizens, permanent residents, landed immigrants, or whatever the situation may be that you are in Canada for, or anywhere around the world that you want to call home. Now, So thank you, Eva, so much for such a great conversation. We will talk again. You're fabulous, and you help educate us and inspired us today. And I take my wig off to you.
I'm
Thank
not
you so
taking
much.
mine off. One of us, I'm not taking mine off.
So thank you so much for being on the show today. Thank you guys for tuning in to Pronoun TV and the Stephanie Stevens Show. Until next time, over and out, my friends. Thank you. Have a blessed week, everybody.
Thank you too. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.